I'm Margaret, 28 years old, and I used to think family gatherings were about love and support. Growing up as the quiet one next to my charismatic older sister, I always felt like I had to prove myself worthy of attention. While she effortlessly commanded every room, I found solace in books and studies, believing that academic achievement would earn me the recognition I craved. Little did I know that my dedication would one day become ammunition for the person who should have been my biggest supporter. That family dinner changed everything between us forever. Before I tell you what happened that night, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and please hit that like button if you've ever felt overlooked in your own family. Make sure to subscribe because I share real stories about overcoming family drama and finding your worth. Now, let me take you back to that dinner that changed everything between my sister and me forever. Looking back, the foundation for that explosive evening was laid decades earlier in our childhood home in suburban Ohio. I was always the studious, introverted younger sister who preferred the company of books to people. My sister Linda, 2 years older, was everything I wasn't. She was outgoing, popular, and effortlessly became everyone's favorite wherever she went. While I spent Friday nights at the library, Linda was at parties, homecoming dances, and football games as the center of attention. Our parents, though they loved us both, had a clear preference that they thought they hid well but was obvious to anyone paying attention. Linda's social achievements were celebrated with enthusiasm. Her homecoming queen crown sat proudly on the mantle, her cheerleading trophies filled an entire shelf, and her dating life provided endless entertainment for family dinners. Meanwhile, my honor roll certificates were quietly placed in a drawer, my academic awards mentioned only briefly before conversation shifted back to Linda's latest adventures. During high school, the differences between us became even more pronounced. Linda dated the quarterback, organized parties, and seemed to glide through life on charm alone. Her grades were mediocre at best, but our parents dismissed this as Linda being too social and well-rounded to focus solely on academics. On the other hand, worked part-time jobs after school to save money for college applications, spent weekends studying, and rarely had time for the social activities that came so naturally to my sister. When college application season arrived, the contrast in our approaches was striking. I researched schools extensively, wrote and rewrote essays, applied for every scholarship I could find, and saved every penny from my job at the local grocery store to pay application fees. Linda casually applied to a few schools, confident that her personality would carry her through interviews and that her mediocre grades wouldn't matter much. She often joked that college was just a 4-year party anyway. The acceptance letters told a different story than our family expected. I received my acceptance to State University with a partial merit-based scholarship, an achievement that represented years of hard work and sacrifice. Linda, however, received rejection after rejection. The school she had assumed would welcome her with open arms instead saw through her lackluster academic record and minimal extracurricular involvement beyond cheerleading. Linda's response to these rejections was to blame everyone but herself. The admissions officers were too focused on grades, the schools were boring anyway, and she claimed she didn't really want to go there. Our parents, clearly disappointed but unwilling to show it, quickly shifted into damage control mode. They found Linda a spot at the local community college and assured her it was just a stepping stone to something better. My 4 years at State University were marked by determination and loneliness. I worked 20 hours a week in the campus library, maintained a 3.7 GPA, and slowly built confidence through academic achievements. I called home every Sunday, sharing stories about my classes, professors, and the few close friendships I had managed to build, but somehow these conversations always felt one-sided, with my parents listening politely before shifting the topic to Linda's latest job or boyfriend. Linda's college experience lasted exactly 1 semester. She dropped out of community college after failing 3 classes, claiming the professors were boring, and that she was too creative for traditional education. Instead of disappointment, our family treated this as a temporary setback. Linda moved back into her childhood bedroom and began working retail jobs, but she was still treated as the fun daughter who would figure things out eventually. When my graduation day arrived, I was proud to walk across that stage knowing I had earned every credit through hard work and determination. My family attended the ceremony, and I felt a brief moment of validation seeing them in the audience. However, Linda's comments during the celebration dinner afterward quickly deflated my joy. She made several remarks about book smarts versus street smarts, and wondered aloud if college was really worth all that debt and stress. Even on what should have been my day, Linda managed to redirect attention to her own opinions and experiences. The years following my graduation brought new challenges as Linda and I settled into our adult lives along very different paths. I started in an entry-level marketing position at a mid-sized company downtown, earning a modest salary that barely covered my small apartment rent and student loan payments. Every dollar was carefully budgeted, every purchase considered twice, but I felt proud of my independence and the slow but steady progress I was making in my career. Linda, meanwhile, continued living in our childhood home with our parents. She cycled through various retail jobs, never staying anywhere longer than 6 months, always finding reasons why each workplace was toxic or not a good fit. Despite her lack of career stability, she maintained an active social life, dating different men every few months and regaling the family with dramatic stories about her romantic adventures. Family gatherings became increasingly difficult for me to navigate. Linda naturally commanded attention with her animated storytelling and vivacious personality, while I found myself sitting quietly on the sidelines. When relatives asked about my work, I would begin to share updates about projects I was managing or skills I was developing, only to have Linda interrupt with a more entertaining story about her latest dating mishap or workplace drama. The pattern became predictable and painful. My achievements at work, including small promotions and recognition from supervisors, were acknowledged with polite nods, before conversation quickly shifted to Linda's more colorful life experiences. When I received my first real promotion after 18 months on the job, complete with a significant salary increase, the family celebration lasted about 10 minutes before Linda launched into a story about a customer who had asked for her phone number at work. Our parents had developed a sophisticated system of making excuses for Linda while holding me to completely different standards. When Linda was late to family events, she was living life to the fullest. When I arrived 5 minutes late due to traffic from work, I was too focused on career to prioritize family. When Linda borrowed money from our parents for the 3rd time that year, she was going through a tough transition. When I politely declined to lend Linda $50, I was selfish and forgetting where I came from. My relationship with David, a fellow college graduate I had met through work, became another source of subtle criticism from Linda. She regularly commented that he was too serious and that I needed someone who could help me loosen up. Meanwhile, her string of short-term relationships with men who had no career goals or direction were celebrated as keeping her options open and not settling too early. The financial dynamics in our family were particularly frustrating. Despite earning less than Linda's potential if she had committed to full-time work, I had achieved financial independence and even occasionally helped our parents with small expenses when their car needed repairs or they wanted to take a weekend trip. Linda, on the other hand, regularly borrowed money for everything from car payments to nights out with friends, yet our parents never seemed to view this as problematic. Linda's jealousy began manifesting in increasingly obvious ways. She started making comments about how I was too serious all the time and no fun to be around. When I shared news about receiving a company award for outstanding performance, Linda rolled her eyes and muttered something about brown nosers getting ahead. Her resentment seemed to grow stronger each time I achieved something meaningful in my professional life. The breaking point came when our parents finally learned the full details of my college scholarship. During a casual conversation, my mother mentioned to her sister that I had received some financial aid for college. I corrected her, explaining that my scholarship was merit-based, not need-based, and represented recognition of my academic achievements rather than our family's financial situation. The room fell silent, and I saw something shift in Linda's expression that I had never seen before. It was pure, undiluted anger. From that moment, Linda began avoiding family gatherings where I would be present. When she did attend, she made pointed comments about people who think they're better than everyone else, and individuals who use education as a weapon. The tension became so thick that I started declining invitations to family events, preferring to avoid conflict rather than endure another evening of subtle hostility. The invitation to our cousin Sarah's engagement party almost went unanswered. I had grown tired of the family dynamics and the way every gathering seemed to become a competition between Linda and me that I never wanted to participate in. However, Sarah had always been kind to me, and I didn't want my issues with Linda to affect my relationship with other family members. members. After much deliberation, I decided to attend, hoping that the focus on Sarah's happy news would keep family tensions in the background. The evening of Sarah's engagement party, I almost changed my mind about attending 3 different times. Standing in front of my closet, I carefully selected a conservative navy blue dress and simple jewelry. Knowing that Linda would likely be dressed to draw attention and not wanting to contribute to any unnecessary drama, I mentally prepared myself for the usual family dynamics, reminding myself that the evening was about celebrating Sarah and that I could leave early if things became uncomfortable. Sarah's backyard had been beautifully decorated with string lights and small round tables scattered across the lawn. About 20 family members were already mingling when I arrived, and I could immediately hear Linda's distinctive laugh carrying across the yard. She was holding court near the drink table, gesturing animatedly while telling some story to our aunts and uncles, clearly having arrived early to establish herself as the evening's entertainment. When I approached the group to say hello, the conversation briefly paused as relatives greeted me warmly. Aunt Helen asked about my work, and I shared news about a successful marketing campaign I had recently completed. Uncle Robert seemed genuinely interested and asked follow-up questions about the creative process and results. For a few minutes, I felt comfortable and valued, enjoying the rare experience of having family members actively engaged in hearing about my professional accomplishments. Linda's interruptions started subtly. As I explained the campaign strategy, she would make small comments like, "That sounds complicated," or "I could never sit at a desk all day." When Uncle Robert praised the creativity involved in marketing work, Linda laughed and said, "Well, some people are just naturally good at sitting in classrooms and offices." Her tone was light, but there was an edge to it that I recognized immediately. The boyfriend Linda had brought to the party, a guy named Jake whom none of us had met before, seemed uncomfortable with her increasing snippiness. When she introduced him as the one, he looked embarrassed rather than pleased. Throughout the evening, I noticed him gently trying to steer her away from topics that seemed to agitate her, particularly when the conversation turned to education or career achievements. As we moved to the dinner tables, I found myself seated directly across from Linda, a seating arrangement that felt deliberate rather than coincidental. The picnic-style tables created an intimate setting where every comment could be heard by everyone nearby, making it impossible to have side conversations or avoid engaging with the entire group. Uncle Robert, perhaps unaware of the tension building throughout the evening, asked me about my college experience. He mentioned that he had always regretted not finishing his degree, and was curious about what had motivated me to stick with it through graduation. His question was genuine and thoughtful, giving me an opportunity to reflect on the challenges and rewards of my university years. As I began to answer, describing the balance between work and studies and the satisfaction of completing something I had worked so hard to achieve, I could see Linda's expression changing. Her jaw tightened, and she took a longer drink from her beer bottle than usual. Jake placed a gentle hand on her arm, as if sensing trouble brewing, but she shrugged him off with more force than necessary. The conversation around our table had naturally evolved into a discussion about education and career paths, with various family members sharing their experiences and perspectives. Uncle Robert continued to show genuine interest in my college journey, asking about specific classes I had enjoyed and professors who had influenced my thinking. For once, I felt like my academic achievements were being treated as interesting rather than boring, and I found myself relaxing into the conversation. And Helen joined in, asking detailed questions about my current marketing work. I described a recent campaign I had led for a local nonprofit, explaining how we had increased their volunteer signups by 40% through targeted social media strategies. The project had been particularly meaningful to me because it combined my professional skills with community service, and I felt proud sharing the results with family members who seemed genuinely engaged. Linda's first direct jab came during my explanation of the campaign metrics. "Well, some people are just naturally good at sitting in classrooms," she said with a forced laugh, taking another long drink from her beer. The comment seemed to come from nowhere, interrupting my description of the community impact we had achieved. Several relatives looked confused by the non sequitur, but I tried to brush it off and continue the conversation. When I attempted to redirect the discussion back to the nonprofit project, Linda struck again. "It's amazing what connections can do for a career," she said, her voice slightly louder than necessary. This time, Jake definitely tried to intervene, suggesting they get some fresh air, but Linda waved him off dismissively. The alcohol was clearly affecting her judgment, but more than that, something deeper was driving her need to undermine every positive thing being said about my work. Cousin Sarah, the guest of honor, noticed the growing tension and tried to redirect everyone's attention to wedding planning details. She began describing her ideas for centerpieces and asking for opinions about flowers, clearly hoping to diffuse whatever was building between Linda and me. For a few minutes, the strategy worked, and conversation flowed more naturally around wedding themes and venue choices. But Linda wasn't finished. As Sarah described her plans for a small, intimate ceremony, Linda interjected, "I mean, not everyone needs a piece of paper to prove they're smart." The comment was ostensibly about marriage certificates, but everyone at the table understood she was really talking about college diplomas. The thinly veiled reference made several relatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger, but I tried to maintain composure. This was Sarah's evening, and I didn't want to create a scene that would overshadow her celebration. I focused on my plate, hoping that Linda would run out of steam or that someone else would successfully change the subject to something less contentious. Mom finally attempted to intervene, saying, "Both my girls are successful in their own ways." Her tone was diplomatic, trying to smooth over the obvious tension without taking sides. However, her comments seemed to have the opposite effect on Linda, whose face reddened with frustration. Rather than feeling supported, Linda appeared angry that Mom wasn't fully endorsing her perspective. Other relatives around the table had definitely noticed what was happening. Conversations at nearby tables continued normally, but our immediate group had grown quiet, with people looking down at their food or making uncomfortable small talk about the weather. The festive atmosphere that had characterized the early part of the evening was rapidly dissolving into awkward tension. I considered excusing myself to use the restroom or help Sarah with something in the kitchen, but leaving felt like running away from a problem I hadn't created. I also worried that my departure might escalate Linda's behavior rather than calm it down. Instead, I stayed seated, hoping that the dinner portion of the evening would end soon and we could all move on to cake and more general socializing. Uncle Robert, either oblivious to the undercurrents or determined to push through them, made one final attempt at normal conversation. He mentioned that he had heard through the family grapevine about some academic awards I had received during college, and he wanted to know more details. His question was innocent and well-intentioned, but it provided Linda with the opening she had apparently been waiting for all evening. What happened next unfolded with the terrible inevitability of a natural disaster. Linda pushed back from the table slightly, her beer bottle clenched in her hand, and looked directly at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was pure malice mixed with years of accumulated resentment, and I knew immediately that whatever she was about to say would cross a line we could never uncross. "You want to know the truth about Margaret's college success?" Linda's voice cut through the remaining dinner conversation like a knife. Every person at our table stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped moving. Even conversations at nearby tables began to fade as people sensed the drama unfolding in our corner of the yard. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds. Linda seemed to savor having everyone's complete attention, the same way she had always enjoyed being the center of focus at family gatherings. But this time, the attention felt different, charged with electricity and the promise of something ugly about to be revealed. "She only got into college because of pity," Linda announced, her words ringing across the suddenly quiet backyard. "They probably had some quota to fill." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning everything it touched. I felt as if I had been physically slapped, the blood rushing to my face while my stomach dropped to somewhere around my feet. The relatives at our table looked mortified. Aunt Helen's mouth fell open in shock, while Uncle Robert stared at Linda as if she had suddenly grown a second head. Cousin Sarah's eyes filled with tears, clearly devastated that her celebration had been hijacked by this family drama. Jake looked like he wanted to disappear entirely, his face flushed with embarrassment at his girlfriend's behavior. But Linda wasn't finished. Perhaps encouraged by the shocked silence, or maybe just drunk enough to have lost all sense of boundaries, she continued her attack. "I mean, look at her. Shy, awkward, no social skills." They felt sorry for her. Each word was carefully chosen for maximum damage, designed to tear down not just my academic achievements but my entire sense of self-worth. Jake made a more serious attempt to pull Linda away from the table, standing up and placing both hands on her shoulders. "Linda, maybe we should go get some air," he said firmly, his voice tight with embarrassment, but Linda shrugged him off aggressively, nearly losing her balance in the process. "I'm fine," she snapped, never taking her eyes off me. I looked toward my parents, desperately hoping for some form of defense or contradiction of Linda's cruel words. Mom was staring at her plate, her face pale and pinched, clearly mortified by the scene but unable or unwilling to speak up. Dad had the expression of someone watching a car accident, horrified but frozen in place. Their silence felt like a second betrayal, almost worse than Linda's original attack. Something inside me shifted. Years of swallowing criticism, years of watching my achievements be minimized, years of accepting that Linda's feelings were more important than my own, all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. I was done being the family scapegoat. I was done protecting everyone else's comfort at the expense of my own dignity. I slowly stood up from my seat, my hands trembling slightly but my resolve strengthening with each second. The movement seemed to surprise everyone, including Linda, who had probably expected me to sit there and take her abuse, as I always had before. The entire backyard had gone completely silent now, with even the most distant relatives turning to watch what would happen next. Looking directly at Linda, I took a deep breath and spoke with a calmness that surprised even me. "And yet I graduated while you dropped out." The words came out clear and strong, carrying across the quiet yard with devastating precision. Simple, factual, and completely undeniable, Linda's face went through a rapid series of changes, from triumph to confusion to rage to something approaching panic. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. For someone who had built her identity around being quick-witted and socially adept, being rendered speechless in front of the entire family was perhaps the most devastating response I could have provided. The silence that followed my statement was deafening. Not a single person spoke. Not a glass clinked. Not even the usual background sounds of the neighborhood seemed to penetrate the bubble of tension surrounding our gathering. Mom finally looked up from her plate, but when our eyes met, she immediately looked away again. Unable to hold my gaze, Dad seemed shocked by my directness, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time as someone capable of standing up for herself, rather than the passive victim of Linda's constant criticism. Some of the other relatives were nodding slightly, as if they had been thinking the same thing, but would never have said it out loud. Linda made several attempts to form a response, her face cycling through various shades of red as she processed what had just happened. She had attacked my character, my intelligence, and my achievements, expecting me to cower as usual. Instead, I had responded with a simple statement of fact that highlighted her own failures while defending my successes. Unable to formulate a comeback, Linda suddenly pushed back from the table and stormed toward the house. Jake hesitated for a moment, looking apologetically at the rest of us, before following her inside. Through the kitchen window, we could see her gesturing wildly as she paced back and forth, clearly trying to process what had just occurred. I calmly placed my napkin on the table and looked around at my family members. Some were still staring at their plates. Others were watching me with expressions ranging from admiration to concern. Cousin Sarah approached me with tears in her eyes, whispering an apology for how the evening had turned out and assuring me that Linda had been completely out of line. The immediate aftermath of my confrontation with Linda felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold from a distance. I quietly gathered my purse and jacket, offering sincere apologies to Sarah for the disruption of her celebration. She hugged me tightly, whispering that she was proud of me for standing up for myself and that Linda's behavior had been inexcusable. Several other relatives approached as I prepared to leave, offering similar support and expressing their shock at Linda's attack. The drive home gave me time to process what had actually happened. My hands were still shaking slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. Adrenaline slowly wearing off and being replaced by a complex mixture of emotions. Part of me felt proud for finally defending myself, while another part worried about the long-term consequences of what I had said. The family dynamics that had existed for 28 years had been permanently altered in a single moment. My phone started ringing before I even reached my apartment. Mom's name appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail, not ready to navigate whatever conversation she wanted to have. By the time I walked through my front door, she had called 3 more times and left 2 voicemails. I poured myself a glass of wine and listened to her messages, which were variations on themes of disappointment and damage control. "Margaret, honey, you know how Linda gets when she's been drinking," the first message began. "She didn't mean what she said, and you really could have handled that better. Family is family, and we need to work through this together." The second message was longer and more frustrated, suggesting that I should be the bigger person and reach out to Linda to smooth things over. When Mom called for the 5th time that evening, I finally answered. The conversation was painful and revealing in ways I hadn't expected. Rather than focusing on Linda's cruel and unprovoked attack on my character and achievements, Mom seemed primarily concerned with the embarrassment Linda had experienced by being called out in front of the family. The fact that Linda had publicly humiliated me first seemed to be less important than my response. "You made your sister look foolish in front of everyone," Mom said, her voice tight with stress. "Yes, she said some things she shouldn't have, but you know she's struggling right now. She's been having a hard time watching you succeed when her own life isn't going the way she planned." The implication that I should have absorbed Linda's abuse to protect her feelings was both hurtful and illuminating. Dad sent a text message later that night that was brief but somehow more supportive than Mom's lengthy phone calls. "Linda went too far tonight, but family is family. Hope we can all move past this." While still emphasizing family unity over accountability, his message at least acknowledged that Linda had been wrong to attack me. The next few days brought an unusual silence from Linda, which was actually more unsettling than her usual dramatics. Typically, family conflicts involving Linda resulted in a flurry of phone calls, dramatic declarations, and attempts to rally various relatives to her side. This time, however, there was nothing. No calls, no texts, no messages passed through other family members. I threw myself into work projects, finding comfort in the professional environment where my contributions were valued and respected. My colleagues noticed that I seemed quieter than usual, but when a few close work friends asked if everything was okay, I found myself reluctant to share the family drama. The contrast between my professional life, where I was respected and appreciated, and my family life, where I was constantly defending my worth, became starkly apparent. Through the family gossip network, information about Linda's version of events began to filter back to me. According to her narrative, I had publicly humiliated her at a family gathering, attacking her when she was vulnerable and struggling. She was apparently telling people that I had gotten too big for my britches since graduating college, and that I looked down on family members who hadn't followed the same path. Linda's ability to reframe herself as the victim in the situation was both predictable and infuriating. She had conveniently omitted the part where she had accused me of getting into college due to pity, instead focusing on my response as an unprovoked attack. Some family members who hadn't been present at the party were apparently buying into her version of events. However, I also learned that several relatives who had witnessed the entire exchange were quietly supporting my actions. Cousin Sarah had apparently set the record straight when Linda tried to gain sympathy from her, explaining exactly what had been said and emphasizing how cruel Linda's initial attack had been. Uncle Robert had also spoken up, telling family members that Linda had been completely out of line and that my response had been justified. The division within the family became increasingly apparent over the following weeks. Some relatives, particularly those who hadn't been present at the party, seemed to accept Linda's victim narrative. Others, especially those who had witnessed her attack firsthand, understood why I had responded as I did. The middle ground consisted of family members who wished the whole thing would just go away and everyone would return to the previous status quo. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself feeling lighter and more confident than I had in years. The constant stress of family gatherings, where I had to watch every word and manage Linda's moods, was gone. Instead of dreading family events, I simply stopped attending most of them, focusing instead on relationships with colleagues, friends, and David, who had been incredibly supportive throughout the entire ordeal. 2 months after the engagement party incident, the silence from Linda had become the new normal in our family dynamic. She hadn't spoken to me directly since that night, communicating only through other family members when absolutely necessary for logistics like holiday planning or family birthdays. What surprised me was how peaceful this lack of contact felt, rather than painful or concerning. During this period of family quiet, my professional life continued to flourish in ways that felt almost symbolic. I received another promotion at work, this time to senior marketing coordinator with a substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities. The promotion came with recognition for the nonprofit campaign I had mentioned at Sarah's party, along with several other successful projects I had managed throughout the year. The celebration of this career milestone felt different from previous achievements. Instead of immediately calling family to share the news and hoping for validation that rarely came, I celebrated with David and my work colleagues who had supported and mentored me. We went to a nice restaurant, toasted my success, and spent the evening talking about future goals and opportunities. opportunities. Nobody questioned whether I deserved the promotion or made backhanded comments about luck or connections. When I did eventually mention the promotion to Mom during one of our increasingly infrequent phone calls, her response was politely congratulatory but lacked genuine enthusiasm. "That's nice, dear," she said, before quickly shifting the conversation to Linda's latest job prospects and wondering when Linda and I would work things out. The contrast between my work friend's celebration and my family's lukewarm response was stark and telling. My relationship with David deepened during this period, partly because the absence of family drama allowed me to be more present and less stressed in our interactions. He had always been quietly supportive, but watching him navigate the aftermath of the engagement party situation showed me how much he truly understood and valued me. When family members occasionally criticized my handling of the Linda situation, David consistently defended my right to stand up for myself. The extended family dynamics were shifting in interesting ways. Several cousins began reaching out to me privately, sharing their own experiences with Linda's behavior over the years. Apparently, I wasn't the only family member who had been on the receiving end of her put-downs and competitive comments. Cousin Janet told me about a Christmas gathering where Linda had made cruel comments about her weight, while Cousin Mark described how Linda had belittled his decision to become a teacher rather than pursuing a real career. These conversations were both validating and eye-opening. For years, I had thought Linda's treatment of me was somehow personal or that I was being too sensitive about her comments. Learning that she had a pattern of targeting other family members' insecurities and achievements helped me understand that her behavior wasn't really about me at all, but rather about her own unhappiness and insecurity. Dad began calling me more frequently during this period, perhaps recognizing that he had failed to defend me when I needed support. These conversations were awkward at first, with him clearly wanting to rebuild our relationship while avoiding directly criticizing Linda or taking sides in the ongoing family rift. Gradually, though, our talks became more substantive, and I began to see glimpses of the father who had once been proud of my academic achievements. Through family updates, I learned that Linda's life was becoming increasingly unstable. She had broken up with Jake shortly after the engagement party, apparently because he had been embarrassed by her behavior that night and had suggested she owe me an apology. She was still living at home with our parents, cycling through different retail jobs, and generally struggling to find direction in her life. Part of me felt sympathy for Linda's struggles, understanding that her attack on me had likely come from a place of deep insecurity about her own choices and failures. However, I also recognized that her problems didn't justify treating me as a target for her frustrations. The fact that she had chosen to publicly humiliate me rather than dealing with her own issues demonstrated a level of cruelty that I could no longer excuse or enable. When Linda made indirect overtures about reconciliation through our cousin Sarah, suggesting that we should move past what had happened, I found myself setting clear boundaries for the first time in our relationship. I was willing to be civil at family gatherings when necessary, but I wasn't going to pretend that her attack hadn't happened or that everything could go back to the way it was before. Mom continued to pressure me to be the bigger person and reach out to Linda, but I held firm in my position that I wasn't the one who needed to apologize. I had defended myself against an unprovoked attack, stating a simple fact rather than responding with equal cruelty. If Linda wanted to repair our relationship, she would need to acknowledge what she had done and take responsibility for her behavior. The holiday season provided the ultimate test of these new family dynamics. For the first time in my adult life, I made my own plans for Thanksgiving rather than automatically assuming I would attend the family gathering. David and I volunteered at a local soup kitchen, and then had dinner with his family, who welcomed me warmly and seemed genuinely interested in my work and goals. The months following that pivotal engagement party became a period of profound personal growth and self-discovery for me. As the initial shock and adrenaline of the confrontation faded, I began to understand the deeper implications of what had happened and how it had changed not just my relationship with Linda, but my entire approach to family dynamics and self-worth. The most significant realization was how much energy I had been spending over the years trying to earn approval and validation from people who were never going to provide it. Every family gathering had been an exercise in managing Linda's moods, avoiding topics that might trigger her jealousy, and downplaying my own achievements to keep peace. The mental and emotional toll of this constant management had been enormous, though I hadn't fully recognized it until it was gone. My career continued to flourish in this environment of reduced family stress. The promotion I had received came with opportunities to lead larger projects and mentor newer employees. For the first time, I found myself speaking up confidently in meetings, sharing ideas without second-guessing myself, and accepting praise without immediately deflecting or minimizing my contributions. The confidence I had gained from standing up to Linda seemed to spill over into every area of my professional life. When my parents finally learned the complete details of my college scholarship, including the academic requirements I had met and the competition I had won against hundreds of other applicants, their reaction was a mixture of shame and pride that felt both satisfying and sad. They had spent years minimizing my educational achievements, and suddenly they were confronted with evidence of just how significant those accomplishments actually were. "Why didn't you ever tell us all this before?" Mom asked during one of our phone conversations, her voice filled with what sounded like genuine regret. The honest answer was that I had tried to share these details many times over the years, but the information had always been overshadowed by whatever drama Linda was creating or dismissed as bragging when I tried to explain the significance of my academic recognition. Dad's approach to processing this information was more direct. During one of our increasingly frequent phone calls, he said, "I think I owe you an apology, Margaret. I didn't understand how hard you had worked or how much you had accomplished. I should have defended you better over the years." While these words couldn't undo decades of feeling overlooked, they provided a foundation for rebuilding our relationship on more honest terms. The extended family response to my boundary setting had been mixed but generally more positive than I had expected. Some relatives continued to push for reconciliation, suggesting that family harmony was more important than individual grievances. However, many others expressed private support for my decision to stand up for myself, with several sharing their own stories of times when Linda had been cruel or dismissive toward them. Linda's attempts at reconciliation came sporadically and indirectly, usually through third parties who would mention that she missed our relationship or felt bad about how things ended. However, these messages never included actual accountability for her behavior or acknowledgement of the hurt she had caused. Instead, they seemed designed to test whether I would be willing to return to our previous dynamic without her having to confront her own actions. The most telling moment came during a family birthday party that I attended several months after the engagement party incident. Linda was also present, and we maintained polite but distant interaction throughout the evening. When conversation turned to career updates, I shared news about a major client presentation I had delivered successfully. Linda's response was a tight smile and a comment about how some people are lucky to find jobs that suit them. Even months later, she couldn't acknowledge my professional achievements without diminishing them. This interaction confirmed for me that nothing had fundamentally changed in Linda's perspective, and that any reconciliation would likely involve me accepting continued disrespect and minimization of my accomplishments. David's support throughout this entire process had been unwavering and insightful. He helped me recognize patterns in my family relationships that I had been too close to see clearly, and he encouraged me to trust my own perceptions rather than constantly second-guessing myself. His family's warm acceptance of me provided a powerful contrast to the conditional approval I had experienced in my own family for so many years. The most liberating aspect of this new dynamic was the freedom to be genuinely proud of my achievements without apologizing or downplaying them. When colleagues congratulated me on successful projects, I learned to say thank you instead of deflecting with self-deprecating comments. When friends expressed admiration for my work ethic or accomplishments, I accepted their praise as sincere rather than questioning their motives. As I approached the one-year anniversary of the engagement party confrontation, I reflected on how much my life had changed. The relationship with Linda remained strained and distant, but I had built stronger connections with other family members who were willing to see and appreciate me for who I actually was. Most importantly, I had learned to value myself independent of family approval, finding validation in my own achievements and the relationships with people people who genuinely supported my growth and success. The lesson I learned from that night went far beyond family dynamics. I discovered that sometimes the people who should celebrate you the most are the ones who feel most threatened by your success. For years, I had tried to make myself smaller to accommodate Linda's insecurity, but that approach had helped neither of us. By standing up for myself, I had finally broken a cycle of enabling that had been destructive for our entire family. Some bridges burn not because you light the match, but because they were built on false foundations to begin with. My relationship with Linda had been based on my willingness to accept less than I deserved, and her expectation that I would always prioritize her comfort over my own dignity. When I finally refused to participate in that dynamic, the relationship couldn't survive, but that wasn't my fault or my responsibility to fix. Most importantly, I learned that my worth isn't determined by family approval or anyone else's validation. The achievements I had worked so hard for were valuable, regardless of whether Linda or even my parents fully appreciated them. Building a life based on my own values and goals, surrounded by people who genuinely support and encourage me, turned out to be far more fulfilling than constantly seeking approval from people who are never going to provide it. Standing up for yourself sometimes means accepting that relationships might change forever, but protecting your own dignity and self-worth is always the right choice. That night at the engagement party, I finally chose myself, and it made all the difference. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who constantly put you down? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear that their achievements matter regardless of family approval. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about overcoming family drama and finding your own worth. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve to be celebrated, not torn down, by the people who claim to love you. I hope you find the courage to stand up for yourself when you need to, and I wish you all the strength to build relationships that truly value who you are.